we are out here at about 5 a.m. to photoscan a mountain. We got the drone, we got Jan, we got the climbing gear, so let's rope up, get to the top of this mountain, and scan it. So we can process our data in reality capture and create a photoreal scene in Unreal Engine 5.
Which one? Which one? Left tiny one. No, on the screen! On the screen! Oh!
Photogrammetry is the process of stitching hundreds, sometimes thousands of images together to create a high-resolution 3D model. Aerial photogrammetry works exactly the same, except we use a drone to capture our images instead of our phone or DSLR. And since I'm a 3D and VFX artist, I 3D scan things to make exact duplicates of real-world objects when traditional 3D modeling and texturing is either too much work or near impossible. 3D scanning takes a while to get used to. It takes a little bit of practice to make sure you're doing it right. So in this video, I hope to walk you guys through all the different steps, tips, and techniques that'll help you shoot better, process your data better, and in the end, get better 3D scans. Now, this video is building off information in a previous 3D scanning video where I covered the entire workflow. So be sure to check that one out as well. Couple things that I'm trying to do when I am scanning with the drone. First off, try and treat it like a normal scan. You can get easily overwhelmed with the size of the object you're scanning, say like these mountains here. So to keep it easy, I will try and capture the entire object in frame for my first pass. Then you can go in for your detail shots. Now, generally, you want to capture whatever you're trying to capture from every angle possible. Just go from left to right. I'm moving as just like a planar movement from left to right along the mountain. Boom up a little bit and go back. Up a little bit and come back. You're quite literally scanning the mountain. And then I'm going to tilt down and do that same thing to get all of the higher angle shots, and I'll do the same from below as well. I'll lower my altitude, tilt up, and do the same scans. That way you're capturing every possible angle of the mountain. Another thing to look out for are your camera settings, of course. Reality capture is going to do a much better job of stitching your images together when they are shot with the same exposure, the same shutter speed. You want a high shutter speed because you don't want blurry images. Autofocus will be your friend, definitely keep that on. Manual ISO, you want all that stuff locked. White balance, you want that locked as well. All of your photos need to be consistent when you're shooting. It doesn't matter if you're using a drone or if you're photo scanning with your phone. So in a perfect situation, you're going to want overcast lighting. That way you can change the light in 3D later to whatever light conditions you want. Living out here in LA, we don't always have that luxury. So we try to get here as early as possible to get the earliest scans when the sun quite didn't touch the mountains. And we'll be staying a little bit later too for the same reason. We are racing the sun. I'm going to try and get echo clips while still completely covered in shade, because that's ideal for scans. You want to get it de-lit essentially.
And we were promised.
Yeah, and we were promised some cloud layer here, but that is not the case. If you have a histogram, take a look at it and imagine a even centered hill right in that histogram. If it's too crunched to the left or the right, that's no good. Keep that hill nice and centered, capturing the full range of your image. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Terrifying.
Why I did it from the side of the mountain. Woo! It is good to be home. Especially after all that, because that was absolutely terrifying. So, let's get into these 3D scans. There's a number of different programs we can use to stitch our images together, but my go-to program has always been Reality Capture by Capturing Reality, the sponsor of today's video. Reality Capture is a state-of-the-art photogrammetry program used to create 3D meshes, orthographic projections, geo-referenced maps, and more automatically from images or laser scans. And besides basic features like creating a point cloud, meshing that point cloud, texturing that mesh, and exporting an FBX, Reality Capture is packed full of various tools to help you refine, optimize, and export your 3D scans, which we'll get into when processing our mountains. It's cool too because there's no limit to how much data you can throw at the program. It can process anything from tiny toys to entire cities. Reality Capture is free to download, and they actually have a number of free datasets on their site you can get experimenting with and export for free right away. But usually, Reality Capture works off their pay-per-input method, where you pay a small fee that's based on your total megapixel count across all your images to export your 3D scan. And through the end of September, you can get 50% off 3,500 PPI points by using the code pwnisher50. So click that link in the description and check it out. I've also included my mountain images for download below so you can follow along in the program. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to do when processing our 3D scans is to delight our images, and it's going to be easiest to do so on the raw images. So if you can shoot raw, definitely do so. I'm using Lightroom because I find it's the easiest way to batch edit photos, but you can use whatever program you want. At the top left, I'll click Add Photos. We will browse to our scan for our raw photos, and we'll go ahead and open these up by clicking Add 140 Photos. And I'll navigate to a photo that has both sunlight and shadows in it. And by going to this top right option here, we're going to open up all of our image settings. The first thing I'll do is adjust the color profile, because this is applying like a little bit of color correction to our image, and we want to work with the flattest image possible. So under profile, let's go ahead and change to, let's browse all profiles. We'll go to Adobe Raw and we'll select Adobe Neutral, and that's going to ensure that it takes the pre-built color correction off of our image. Now from here, we can boost our shadows, we can drop our highlights, we can also drop our white value, and if you don't have a histogram, if you're not seeing that, you can hit the little ellipsis here and click Show Histogram. You can see here it's a little underexposed. I want to bring this right up into the middle, so I'll bring my exposure up so that that little hill there, that peak, is right in the middle of our image. And finally, I'll adjust the white balance. It's a little off, so I'll set it to custom, and we'll set the temperature to 5600, and that feels about good to me. We don't need to do any image distortion correction. Reality Capture takes all that into account and does its own work behind the scenes. So in order to copy these settings across the board to all of your other images, let's go back to all of our images, and we'll hit Control-C for copy, Control-A to select all, and Control-V to paste. And it's as easy as that. All we have to do is right-click and export 140 photos. Image type JPEG is fine, full size, and 100% quality is the way to go. And I'll just export these into a processed folder. So now we can process our images in Reality Capture. And when you first open the program, you'll be introduced to all these different options to start learning and diving into. But let's import our images. The first thing I'm gonna do is at the top left, change our viewport layout. These are all different viewport layouts, but the third one is my favorite as it's the cleanest and is all we really need for what we're about to do. Now you can drag your images in, your processed images in to the viewport. You can drag them in over here to the left. Let's try that, and you can see immediately 140 images were loaded. You might be in the 2DS view where you get to see like a visualization of your images, but I prefer the 1DS. So I'm gonna hold this down, let go on 1DS, and you can drop down this little bit here. You can get a bunch of different information on your image. You can also set control points if you're trying to do that later, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The first thing we want to do is align these images, and I want to show you all how easy it is to do so, how fast and how automatic this process is. We can do it a number of different ways, but by going to the Workflow tab, if we navigate over to Align Images, we can click that, or we can just go to the Alignment tab where we have all of our alignment settings. And I'm just going to click Align Images, wait a couple seconds, and look at this. We have all of our different cameras here lined up. You can see all these little dots in the sky are different camera positions. You can see I just, kind of went along the formation of the cliff. I'm holding right click here to orbit around this model. Left click and hold will pan and move myself around the scene. And you can scroll wheel to zoom in as well. So as you can see, if we kind of back up far enough, we got a nice point cloud view of our 3D scan. And this looks super cool. I can't wait to mesh this. But before we mesh it, let's go ahead and just line it up a little bit to the grid. So if we go to the 3D Tools tab and we hit Set Ground Plane, we'll get this little gizmo, and we can actually just orient this so it's lined up with our grid. We can uncheck that option, and if we hit Set Reconstruction Region, it'll reorient this box. Now this box is what will be meshed. So if we scrunch this in, right, just this little section will be meshed. We don't want to mesh the entire thing. We want to mesh maybe just a section. But for our case, I'm going to go ahead and do most of this thing. And let's go ahead and bring it up here. Let's bring this down just a touch. And you can also hit the numpad buttons to orient between left, right, top, bottom views. And if you hit 0, it'll go back to your main view. If for whatever reason you guys did your alignment and you look here on the left, if we drop this down, we can see camera poses. We have 140 registered images. That means it used all 140 images to build this point cloud. Now, if you have component 0, component 1, and component 2, then you guys are gonna have to use control points to bridge those components together. And I'm not gonna go over control points in this video, but the last video I did on the full 3D scanning process, I go over control points in detail. So be sure to check it out if you guys are having issues trying to combine different components and set control points. Well, let's go ahead and mesh this point cloud. We can go to the Mesh Model tab here up at the top, and we can mesh in high detail, but it's usually not necessary. Normal detail should be fine. So let's click that and see what we get. Be warned, this can take a while. Bam, and we have a nice 3D mesh right here. This is looking really great. We're gonna clean this up next, but let me just walk you through kind of what we're looking at. So if you are seeing kind of a point cloud version of your mesh, that's because there's one of two reasons. Either one, your view, if you go to the View tab, it's set to vertices, and it's just gonna look like a point cloud version. If you have Sweet grayed out, that's because your model is above 40 million tries, and 40 million tries is the cap for Reality Capture's real-time renderer here in the viewport. If it's above 40 million tries, you'll need to go to the View tab and use the clipping box to only view a portion of your mesh. But in our case, since it's under 40 million tries, we can view it in its full glory. We can turn off the clipping box, and let's clean this thing up. If we go to the 3D Tools tab, we have a few different options here to select and deselect different parts of our mesh. So what I'm gonna do is actually grab the lasso tool and kind of just draw the area that I want to keep. And I'll navigate just around this bit here. We'll come up the side of the mountain. And we're basically just gonna chop off all of this stuff that we don't want to view. I'll grab this rock, and this whole bit here is nice. So that's not too bad there. Now we can take this and invert the selection by clicking the invert button there, and we can filter out our selection by clicking filter selection. And that's going to make a new model here under component 0. Now you see all these nasty blue triangles back here. We can get rid of those. If we go to the advanced section here, we can uncheck the lasso tool and we can select marginal triangles, which those are. Or another way we can do it is select the largest connected component, which is our mountain. And once again, we can just invert that selection and filter it out. Wonderful, now we just have our mountain mesh. Next, what we'll do is texture this thing, and I want to talk about a couple different ways to texture this, specifically the best way to texture this. So I'll go to the Mesh Model tab, and instead of just hitting Texture, let's go to the Settings tab and bring this up. And I'll go ahead and open up my Unwrap parameters. So I want to set my texture resolution to the highest possible resolution. So that will be 16K. Perfect. The large triangle removal threshold by default is set to 10, but I'm gonna have this set to 100. And we want our style. By default, it's maximal texture count, but I'm gonna set that to fixed texel size, and I'll make sure texel size is set to optimal. It's gonna make as many 16K textures as it needs to in order to texture this entire mountain face. And with these settings, we'll just hit texture. Bam! Look at that. Look at this. Here's me. I'm chilling up here, hanging from the top of this mountain. Heck yeah, and we got ourselves a textured mountain. Amazing. This right here is gonna be our high quality photo scan. This is what we can make LODs from. This is what we can simplify, because we don't want to bring in a 24 million triangle mountain into Unreal Engine or into Blender or into C4D. We're gonna want to simplify this. We're gonna unwrap it, and then we're going to reproject this high-res texture onto our simplified mesh. So let's get started by closing out our texture settings here. And under the 3D Tools tab, I will navigate to the Simplify tool. And we can set our target triangle count. I'm actually gonna go with 5 million. And we wanna disable our color reprojection and our normal reprojection, because I wanna show you all a method that gives us full control over our texture reprojection in just a second. So let's go ahead and simplify this model. Simplification is complete. We have our model 3 at 24 million tries and our new simplified model 4 at 5 million tries. Perfect. So let's go ahead and close this out. If we drop down model 4, we can see we don't have any textures like we talked about. What we're seeing here are actually just vertex colors for reference here. So the first thing we need to do before reprojecting our texture is unwrap this thing. So if we go to the Mesh Model tab, we can click on the Unwrap settings. Now, if we drop down our Unwrap parameters, we can take a look at our settings. We want 16K textures, for sure. We want that large triangle removal threshold set to 100 as well. And we want a maximal texture count of 1. And we'll unwrap this. Awesome. Now this thing looks like a real pain to look at, actually. Careful, watch your eyes. So it is unwrapped. It's prepped for the texture reprojection. So let's go ahead and close our unwrap tool, and let's go back to our 3D tools, and we'll click on texture reprojection. We're just going to ensure first off that our source model, which should be model number 3, that is our high-res 24 million try model, that will be our source. For our result, that's this model right here, model number 4, our 5 million try model. So make sure those are set correctly. We want color reprojection enabled, of course. We want that color texture, and we also want to enable normal reprojection. We want a normal map as well, because a lot of the details we lost by simplifying this 5 million polygon model, we're going to bring back with that normal map from our high res model number 3. And with that, we can reproject. Amazing. Now we have our simplified 5 million polygon model with 2 textures on it. We have one 16K normal and one 16K color. And now this is optimized, simplified, and ready for export. And the easiest way to do that is to go up to the top left here and click export. And I want to export in FBX. You can search for it here. That's one of my recently used formats. So I'll just click on that, save it. All right, so for our settings, let's go over these. We don't want to save the mesh by parts. So setting that to no is great. FBX, that's what we chose. That's perfect. Let us see. Texture settings, right. So we definitely want to export textures. That's for sure. And we want a texture size of 16K. You can choose 8K, you can choose 32K if you want. 16K is plenty for us right now. 8K I'm sure would be great as well. Now we can unravel the color and normal layers as well. We want to make sure we're both exporting the color and the normal texture. That's exactly what we want. And as a little bonus here, let's drop down the export transformation settings. If we set the transformation preset to Maya, Arnold, and Unreal, it's actually going to scale your scene by 100. That way we don't have to scale our model every single time we bring it into Unreal. And with that, we can hit OK. So let's see what our scan looks like in Unreal 5. I'm also going to show you how to build a master material where you can control tint, saturation, brightness, and normal intensity. So I'm just going to drag our FBX here into the content browser, and we'll be prompted with this little FBX import option here. Now, usually I always want to build a nanite mesh, so I'll check the nanite mesh box here. And for materials, I'm going to drag in our materials manually, so I just set this to do not create and unchecked import materials. And we don't have to worry about import scale because we already set that up in Reality Capture when we exported, and we'll go ahead and import all. Fun fact, so if your little thumbnail display looks strange and doesn't truly display what you're bringing in, if you go to settings and check thumbnail edit mode, you can actually just click and drag to orbit your thumbnail around. And when you're done, you can just hit done editing. And I'll drag in our 16K diffuse map, and I actually rendered out an 8K normal map because a 16K normal map crashes my version of Unreal. Maybe it works for you, but 8K it is for now. So let's drag this out. Oh my goodness, right click, and I'm using WASD to move around. This thing is ginormous, which is exactly what we want. This looks awesome, but it needs a material. So let's go ahead and right click, make a material. We'll just call this mountain master material, and we'll go ahead and double click and get this thing set up. First, I'll just drag our diffuse and normal textures into our scene, and we'll pipe the RGB into base color and the RGB for the normal into normal. Now that is the most basic way to set this up, but I want to show you guys how to get more control over all of this. So let's start with the normal map and make a normal intensity setup. The first thing I'll do is hold 3 and make a constant 3 vector. I'll navigate to the left side here and change the blue channel to 1. So now we have a solid blue and we have a normal map, which is mostly blue. It uses all the color channels, but blue, it works off of kind of the blue channel as its main. Now, if we can slide between blue, solid blue, and blue with detail, then we can effectively set up a normal intensity. And the best way to slide between two things is with a lerp node, and I'll hold L, left click to set that up. And it's as easy as taking the RGB from our normal map into B, this constant 3 vector, our blue solid, into A, and I'll hold S to make a parameter. I'll call this normal intensity, and that will be plugged right into the alpha as our control, right? And we'll plug that into the normal map. So by default, this normal intensity is set to 0, and you can see here on the left in the preview it's turned off. But if I take it up to say like 20, we're maxing it out, right? We can of course go up to 100, it can get crazy. But 1 is default, that is perfect, and that is all we need to set up our normal intensity setup. I'll hit C, call this normal, and that is it for that. Now, for the color node, for the color texture, I want to set up 3 things. I want to do a tint. To be able to tint it, I want to be able to have a saturation control, and I want to be able to have a brightness control. And we're going to do all of that right up in here. So let's turn this off. Let's get this out of here. And we'll start with a tint. So again, we're going to need that constant 3 vector. We need a solid, right? So I'm going to hold 3 and left click. That's going to make our color solid. We can make it any color we want, but by default, we're going to set it to white. That will essentially be turning it off. It's like the same idea. And I'm going to combine this with the texture with a multiply node. I'll hold M and left click. Boom, we got ourselves a multiply. And I'll pipe that into B. I'll pipe this into A. And that's exactly what we need. We can pipe this into base color. Now, if we change the color of this, we can effectively tint it whatever color we want. But by default, let's stick with white, which turns it off. Next, let's do saturation. So I'm gonna use a lerp node. Hold L, left click, all right? And we want to kind of slide between a saturated version of our texture, and that's what we set up here. So I'll take this multiply into B, and I want to slide between this and a desaturated version. And I'm just gonna pull one of these color channels, because they are black and white by default, right into A. And we can hold S, make a parameter. I'll call this saturation, plug that into the alpha. And at default, if I plug this into base color now, right? 0 gives us a black and white image, 20 gives us something really saturated, and 1 is default. That's exactly what we want. And finally, let's set up a brightness control. Very, very simple. A multiply node, hold M and left click. We'll pipe this in all the way through and hold S for a parameter. I'll call this brightness. Plugged right into B. And by default, it's set to 0. It's gonna just be total darkness. 1 gets us a normal looking effect, and 20 totally maxes it out. So that's about it. The only thing we need to do is right click this color node here and convert it to a parameter. We'll call it tint. And we can select all this, hit C, title it albedo, and we're almost done. I just want to have control over the specular and roughness channels of our material as well. So I'll right click specular, bring that out, right click roughness. That's good to go. And I'll stick to the Quixel Megascan's defaults. Specular, they usually do 0.5, roughness of 1. And that should do it. I'll save, close out, and we can right click our master material and create a material instance, which we can apply to our 3D mesh right here. Boom. Wonderful. 2 things I want to do setup wise. I'll double click the actual scan itself, and I'm going to apply this material instance to it. So by default, it just comes out with this material. And I want to adjust a couple of these parameters in the material instance. So let's give it a slightly warmer tint, and I want to give it a bit more normal intensity. So I'll set that to about 3, and that feels pretty good to me. Bam, we got ourselves a solid photo scan here. This is pretty good for like mid-ground, background kind of scans. The closer you get with your drone to the actual mountain, the higher res your 3D mesh will be. Thank you so much for watching. I hope y'all learned something new in this video and are getting inspired to do your own 3D scans. It's a blast, and it's such a cool way to start collecting your own asset library of unique custom assets. If you want to get your hands on these photo scans, I do have them uploaded to my Patreon. Otherwise, you can download the processed images I have of one of the scans and run it in Reality Capture yourself. Good luck and happy scanning. See you guys next week.